Okay, so let me just make sure this is doing what I need it to do. Where we at? Channel. Videos. Live. Okay, let's mute that. I don't want that coming through the speakers. Okay, so, um, good news and bad news. Actually, I don't have any good news. We're here. That's the good news. The bad news, I let you guys out too early last time. Not that that's like it's not gonna cause problems in the future or anything, but 9:15 isn't when we get out. That's just too short of a class. I had that mixed up with my 10 o'clock class when they get at 11:15. We finished this class at 9:45, so we had like 30 more minutes. But I mean, it was the intro days, so it's normally short anyway, so it's not a big deal. But it was early and my brain was fried and I couldn't remember what time we got out. So just FYI for future classes, we don't get out at 9:15. That was a goof on my part, but you get that. Um, I don't think there's anything else. I mean, I know it's like the first real day, but any questions about anything before we get started on stuff? No? Cool. So, before we do get started, I'm going to hit you guys with a question from my other class. This is what I usually do. So, technically this is from my European history class, but like with the historical lens thing, it works for everybody, and it gives us a good sort of context of what we're talking about. Because, I mean, everybody knows what history is, right? Well, let's find out. So I'm going to show you three structures, three things built by people. One of them is not technically historical, and I want you to tell me which one, and then you're going to defend your answer. You're going to tell me why, and I might ask you follow-up questions as to what your reasoning is here. So, all right, we have Stonehenge. I forgot to look up. It's somewhere in England. It's probably somewhere dumb like Derryburg or something. And then of course the Colosseum in Rome, Italy, and the Continuum, which you are all currently located inside. So, which of these is not a historic structure? I know what we're all thinking, but you got to tell me why. Okay, why? Say that last part again. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Once again, you're almost there. Like my last class, of course, answered the continuum, and they gave me some reasoning behind it, and part of the reasoning was almost there. So I'll give you partial credit on that. Anybody else want to throw out a guess? I mean, obviously, I'm not. I say partial credit. I'm just throwing words around. I'm not grading anybody on this. Nothing from anybody? It is early on a Monday. All right. So, let's go back to what you said about the meaning behind it. Um, So let's just go from most recent to oldest. What is the meaning behind the continuum? I feel like it's pretty cut and dry. Right. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, it's I mean, lots of. I mean, depends on what publication you want to read on it. You know, it's a combination of Francis Marion and Florence Arlington Tech. It's a Darla Moore Foundation. Blah blah blah. Yeah, it's all this. How about the Coliseum? Yep, Gladiators Theater. They had naval battles apparently. Also, they filled it with water and had like mock naval battles. That was wild. How about Stonehenge? What was Stonehenge built for? Exactly. Now, why do we know what this was built for and what that was built for? Well, I mean, obviously this one because it's right now, but like Rome, why do we know about this structure that's like 2,000 years old? Why do we even know it's called the Colosseum? Exactly. History is, by definition, written record. So, every day we write stuff down, that's history. Despite this being new, we've got all sorts of friggin' history about it besides, you know, what's written about it. But I mean, even you can go to the blueprints of when it was built. You can go out and talk to the contractors that built it. Coliseum, we got a lot written about that, even like when it was being constructed. In fact, it was built over the ashes of Nero's old palace after it burned down. Um, Stonehenge, I mean, obviously there's stuff written about it, but not like from when it was being built, because there was no written language in that area at that time. Therefore, by definition, Stonehenge is prehistoric. So it's not, by definition, a historic structure. Now, that's like, you know, professional history definition, not just like, this is a historic structure because it's old and important. So, you know, it's like saying something's a theory or a scientific theory. They're two different things. But regardless, yeah, that's the difference in history as written record and prehistory as in they don't have written record. Which also means today, in the year of our Lord 2025, there are uncontacted tribes in like the Amazon and islands in the Pacific that do not have written record and therefore are technically prehistoric. It's not about time, technically. It's about written record. Now, we don't go into that too much here with American history. Obviously, it's a lot more recent than, like, when we talk about Western civilization. But we do talk about the Native Americans when they first came over, and when they were first starting out, most of them didn't have written records. And the few that did often had their stuff destroyed. Thanks, Spanish. So, yeah, that's what history is, definition-wise. It's written record. Okay, that's just what I wanted to get into to start. So let's get to our actual notes. All right. So chapter 1 is Mapping Global Frontiers. It goes to 1585. Kira. So, and I mean, we're gonna start like. Well, if I can get to the freaking start of the chapter. 13,000, 15,000 BCE. And then we're going to get up to 1585 by the end of the chapter. So, yeah, we're going to be jumping around through a lot of time. Because, again, there's not a lot of written record. Like, Mesopotamia and Egypt and, like, the early civilizations in the West had writing pretty early on. Here in North America, that didn't happen until a lot later. So, anyway. Native Americans first started showing up, crossed over from Northeast Asia around 16,000 to 14,000 BCE. I'll get into that in just a second. Although, and this isn't in the book, but I discovered this while I was redoing my notes a few years back, there has been evidence discovered that there were humans in North America as long ago as 40,000 years ago. Now, that's not uncommon. This is my biology side talking. But that's not uncommon for, like, groups of creatures, you know, animals, people, whatever. I mean, we're primates, but again, I'm not teaching a biology course, to migrate to a region and settle there for thousands, even millions of years before simply dying out. I mean, just completely going extinct. And then much, much later, another group, either of that species or of a similar species, showing up and just refilling that niche. So that's not uncommon, especially if you really start looking around the world at like really old human civilizations. A long, long time ago, we poked out into a lot of places that we could not stick around because we're not real good at surviving until we start like really building settlements, and that takes a while. So they came from Asia to North America via a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, known as Beringia. This is where the Bering Straits is today. It was the last ice age, so it was all one big ice bridge. And by ice bridge, I mean like it was just all ice. It wasn't like a narrow anything. It just seemed like frozen tundra. They followed mammoths, musk oxen, woolly rhinoceroses, you know, the ice age critters. So as they made their way into North America, some settled on the coast, others gradually made their way inland, others made their way down the Pacific coast using small boats to find more game, because by about 10,000 years ago, most of these large fauna had gone extinct, due in part to the shifting of the ice age, and to a lesser extent, the hunting by the humans. The human population wasn't that large. But I will say that while mammoths had gone extinct here in North America, the last vestiges of mammoths did exist in Siberia a little bit longer. So, just FYI, this is something I always like to bring up. Mammoths were still around when the pyramids were being built. So, like, one of the greatest wonders of the world, which still exists today, were being built while we still had mammoths around. I mean, obviously, they were in a completely different part of the world, and people in Egypt never saw a mammoth ever, but they existed on the planet at the same time. Um, it took a while for these groups to begin to settle down. Which again, this is something that we see in Europe just a little bit faster. Well, Europe and Asia, where the groups go from nomadic to semi-nomadic to eventually settling down and doing like farming. So let's see. Do. So rather than remaining as nomads, they allow for a large population and accumulation of possessions. They formed horticulture, which is very early agriculture, small plots of land, simple tools, which developed in modern-day Mexico, where modern-day Mexico currently is. I mean, we're going to be using a lot of modern-day terms just to give you guys an idea of where we're talking about. But yeah, when you're always on the move, like following herds of animals and getting by on like berries and roots and stuff, the population's not going to be very big. If you get sick or you get hurt, you're probably just going to die because you're going to slow the group down, and that's going to lead to more sickness and more death within the group. So it's very much survival of the fittest in nomadic cultures. Um, but once you can settle down and once you have like a stable farming culture, you have a stable source of food. Um, and then the population can grow. You can build defenses around your little village. It's just better in the long term for, well, the human population. And you can still go out and hunt. Like, the animals are just around. You're just not following them. And, actually, um, this is something we talk about more in my Western Civilization course, but farming didn't come first. At least in Europe, I don't know about here with the Native Americans, but like eventually humans realized certain animals would stick around if you fed them, even the ones that they ate. So like cattle, for example. So they just like were, well, if we keep these animals around and like pin them in and just feed them and only kill the ones we're going to eat, we've got food. But then once they did that, they had to grow food to keep the cattle fed. And they also realized, wait, if we can grow food for the cattle, we can grow food for us as well. So then they had cattle and also like wheat, I think, eventually. And thus civilization was born. It's just as simple as that. So there is Beringia, the land bridge between, obviously, what is modern-day Russia and modern-day Alaska. So the Bering Strait was basically just frozen solid. So all of this was more or less solid land. Again, solid land being ice, but when it's, dozens or hundreds of feet thick, it might as well be solid land. Like, for example, the North Pole isn't solid land. There is no land north of like northern Canada. It's all just ice. Woolly rhinoceros, in case you didn't know what a rhinoceros looked like with hair. So there you go. They also were a little bit bigger than modern day rhinoceros. A lot of giganticism in Ice Age creatures. For example, the woolly mammoth, if you aren't familiar with what they look like. One of the more famous of the Ice Age critters. And then we have approximately what the villages would have looked like. Again, this sort of thing, really, really minor archaeological evidence of this because not a lot of that sticks around. Mostly what they would find is pieces of tools, sometimes like indentations in the ground that were left over and usually could only be found through like ground penetration radar because it's buried by just other stuff by that point. But this is what it would have looked like. You have the houses in the middle. They're set up like teepees, where you've got the hole in the top so they can have a fire inside, and it pulls the air in, and then all the smoke goes out the top, so you're not suffocating in there. And then I need to not use my hand. We're online. I keep forgetting. Right. And then all the fields go outwards around it, which not only means they've got plenty of room for food, but they've cleared this land of trees and stuff so they can see danger coming, just as sort of a secondary benefit. If there's another rival tribe, because humans don't get along real well, or a freaking bear, or whatever other large animals lived around that time that ate people, you can see them coming. All right. Now, that's just like really early native people in general. Let's talk about the big three: the Aztecs, the Maya, and the Incas. Because for the most part, well, we'll talk about some other named ones a little bit later, but like these are the big ones. These are the ones we've all heard about. These are the ones that had like substantial culture and still to this day ruins. And they were done dirty by the Spanish, which, I mean, everybody was done dirty by the Spanish at some point. And then the English came along, and then everybody was done dirty by the English. So, it's a European tradition. So, they developed early in the 16th century. Aztec and Mayan societies were along the equatorial region, which is to say about the middle region of Mexico and like Central America. And the Inca were pretty much all of what is modern-day Peru, which is the Pacific coast of South America. So this is about 1325 CE, which is AD, whichever you prefer. I don't care. That's just what the book uses. The Aztecs, which called themselves the Mexica, hence Mexico, but they were called the Aztecs by, I guess it was Cortez. So for some reason we're sticking with that. I don't know why we're not calling them Mexico. I don't know. Whatever. They got their capital Tenochtitlan. I've never been able to properly pronounce that. Where modern-day Mexico City is, because modern-day Mexico City was built on top of their capital, which we'll get to a little bit later. Now, despite them being this, like, substantial culture with huge temples and whatnot, they were still semi-nomadic. They didn't stay in one place very long. I don't even know if I'd say villages, but like towns would move around. And they were still very war-oriented. They would take over other tribes. But rather than like completely just slaughter them, it would be I guess you would say like a political takeover. Like they'd come in and be like, hey, we can turn you into fertilizer, or you can become part of the larger empire. And they're like, okay, well, I know which one sounds better in the long run. And so they would use the knowledge of the conquered tribes to add to the Mexican Empire. So they gained knowledge of irrigation, cultivation, written language. So while they might not necessarily have created those themselves, they did accumulate them through their conquest and created one of the greatest civilizations the Americas had ever seen. And once we get to like Cortez and his boys ruining everything. Um, yeah, they were. If they had had gunpowder, they would have been on par with like European civilizations at the time. It's just that gunpowder wasn't something that was readily available in North America. There's this big thing. This is just like a historian argument, but like one of the main reasons that the Europeans were able to become such like worldwide uh, have such worldwide influence is they had easy access to iron. Like there was fairly easy access to iron, and so very early on they had access to iron, which if you refine it becomes steel, which is pretty much the best material for making weapons. Um, and then eventually they had gunpowder, and then eventually put those together into obviously guns and cannons. And while China and Japan had that early on, they sort of stagnated, while the Europeans, being split into a bunch of smaller countries, constantly fought and constantly pushed um, their technology forward. Whereas here in North America, there weren't readily available iron deposits. All our stuff is way underground. So the Native Americans weren't able to access it. So they stayed at a, relatively speaking, lower technological level. Anyway, that's all conjecture, but something that I've read in the past, which, I mean, it makes sense. It seems like the places with easier access to weapons can do more in a shorter period of time. Also, just real quick, I mentioned here that written language was a thing with the Aztecs, which means they have history. That's something that I kind of alluded to earlier. And then Cortez and his lads showed up and burned everything down. We have some records from the Aztecs. We have some stuff that managed to survive, but not much. There was, I mean, you're going to hear this word a lot in reference to Native Americans, but there was a pretty substantial campaign of genocide against the Aztecs and, well, the rest of the groups, particularly when the Spanish came rolling through. So, like, destroying any evidence of their culture was part of that. So what we have is fragmented. But this is why we have all those weird conspiracy theories of like the Aztec calendar and blah 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 and the end of the world, and it's like, my dude, that's just when the calendar ended. Like, if they were still around, they'd have just made another one. It's like, oh no, the end of the world is December 31st of this year. It's like, that's just when the calendar ends, my dude. Go buy another one. Anyway, the Maya were around the Yucatan Peninsula in what's modern-day Guatemala. Their civilization began around 900 BC, or it existed between 900 BCE and 300 CE. Large cities, stone temples, mathematics. They learned about the passage of the stars, which, on the one hand, is like, it's like a mathematical thing. Like that's something that like the Greeks and the Egyptians and like all the ancient civilizations of the West are considered like really learned to be able to do. But also, like, when you're in that period of history when like the sun goes down, there is nothing to do but look at the sky. And as long as your eyes are good, you might notice that, like, oh, well, this star over here has moved this way, but the other stars are sticking around. That star must be different somehow. And they, like, understood that, like, they were different. Not necessarily that they were planets, but that there was something different about them. And using math, because, again, humans have brains, they were able to figure a lot of this out. So again, I just have to slander Ancient Aliens guy. People in the past could do stuff. In fact, they did a lot of stuff. They just didn't have the technology of the day to help them. They used the brains. By 800 CE, though, the civilization started to collapse. So by the time the Spanish showed up in the 1500s, or no, 16th century? Yeah, 1500s. They were the small city-states that were trading with the Aztecs. Now, city-states are something we talk about in European history, mostly with the Greeks. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's what it sounds like. Each city is its own individual nation. They're Maya through culture and nothing else. They don't share a government. They don't share laws. I mean, they probably have similar laws, just similar laws just due to the culture. But like, if you are in this city and you break a law and then you go to this other city, the people in this other city aren't going to give a crap because you are essentially in another country. Unless, like, they had some agreement through trade or something and whatever you did in this previous city was bad enough that the people in the other city cared. But, like, they were individual nations, essentially. Now, while that does mean that each individual city would be fairly strong, it also means that as like an overall structure, extremely weak. Whereas the Aztecs have an empire, the Mayas are a bunch of little dudes on hills telling people to get off their lawn. So that's why when we talk about the collapse of these native civilizations, we talk about the Aztecs and the Incas. The Maya they just disappeared along with the Aztecs pretty much. So the Incas, so they basically were the Aztecs, but in South America. They conquered other tribes and used the technology and culture of the other tribes to build their empire. Also, though, they were in a really good spot geographically, which is, as I always say when I'm talking about, say, like Athens, when we talk about the Greeks, sort of playing on an easy mode. The land you're on is just really good. The fertile mountain valleys and their capital Cusco was right in the middle. Yes, if you've watched Emperor's New Groove, that's what the emperor was named after, was the capital of the Incan Empire, because literally that's what the whole empire was based on, was the Incas. Highly advanced roads, cities, temples. This is why these are the big three. They were extremely advanced for the time, not just for being in the Americas, but just like in general. Compared to European nations, many of these were peer nations. Like I said, if they had gunpowder, they would have been pretty much on the level of England, Spain, and France, more or less. They just wore a lot less clothes because it was hot as hell down there. They were on the freaking equator. So let's see. Here is where the Aztec Empire was. Again, kind of southern Mexico. There is their capital, Tenochtitlan, whatever, which is where modern New Mexico City is. Also, real quick aside, Lake Texcoco, I believe is the lake that I'm remembering, but I'll pull this up again real quick. So, another thing you guys might remember about the Aztecs is they had a lot of gold. While they didn't have a lot of iron, which is unfortunate for them when the Spanish came calling, they had a lot of gold. And the thing about gold is, well, human brains are all wired very similar. We're like crows. We like shiny things. So pretty much humans across the world have all decided gold good. However, the Aztecs had so much gold that it was less of a like precious thing that we all must covet and more of a this is nice. Not just because shiny, but also it's fairly soft, pretty easy to carve and mold and make stuff out of. So you can turn a lump of shiny metal into a really intricate carving, and you can bedazzle it with gems and stuff. And they did a lot of that. And then, because they had so much, they had this ritual, I think it was once a year, something like that, or every 5 years, I don't know, where they would go to this big lake, which I think, again, was this one right next to the Capitol. It might have been a different one, but the one next to the Capitol makes the most sense. They would go to the lake, have this big festival, honoring their gods, and they would yeet these big pieces of gold into the lake as a sacrifice to the god. Which, again, they had so much. It wasn't that big of a deal to them. And then the conquistadors came. And, of course, they took all the gold they could get their grubby hands on, but then they found out about all this gold that's down at the bottom of this lake. They're like, okay, well, we want all the gold. So they tried to go down and get that gold at the bottom of the lake. Turns out this lake was really muddy, and the visibility in this lake was basically zero. And more or less every conquistador that went down never came back. And then, after Mexico declared its independence from Spain and became, its essentially modern day equivalent, they decided they were going to get that gold. So they blocked off part of the lake and drained it. So it's, well, not dry, still very muddy, and went down to try to fish this gold out. And it still killed people, because this mud was sucking people down. So moral of the story, don't mess with other people's gold. I'm not saying the gold was cursed, but don't mess with other people's gold. Also, speaking of the Spanish being greedy, and there's three major issues with this. We'll get to the third one a little bit later. So the first one, the lake. The second one, when you have big deposits of gold, also the Spanish had the Aztecs had like a metric ton of silver. There's one other precious metal that's often found alongside gold, and that's platinum. Unfortunately, for the Spanish, they didn't really know what platinum was because it was so rare. So when they got back to Spain and the officials at the docks saw what they brought, they're like, "Oh, what's this crap?" Because just raw platinum doesn't look very nice. It's just sort of a muddy-looking silver. So they threw it overboard. So there was a bunch of platinum right off the coast of Spain, but unfortunately, the Spanish coast is right at the continental shelf. So long story short, if you wanted to go down there and get that platinum, it would be like going down and seeing the Titanic. Cough, cough, Ocean Gate. So, that's two instances of Spanish greed going poorly for them. And we'll get to the third one a little bit later. It's not quite as people dying, but it's still amusing. So, here's some examples of what these cities would have looked like back then, the Mayan cities, or Aztec cities. Because I always just say Aztec, Maya, Inca, just in a row. So this is the Aztec stuff. Um, modern day we see this. These are the ruins. But at the time they were all painted up, which actually also, this goes well into, again, my European stuff. When you see, like, Greek and Roman statues, they're just like bare marble. They didn't look like that. They were painted. They were kind of gaudy, I'll be honest, but they were painted up. The paint that was used was tempera paint, I think is what it's called. The base is egg whites, which means it's an organic paint, which means if it's not reapplied over time, it literally rots and falls off. So that's why today all the old statues and stuff from, say, Greece and Rome are just bare marble, because all the paint just like fell off, and a lot of people never realized that it was actually painted, which again is what happened here. All this stuff was painted and really colorful, but it was this organic paint that if you didn't continuously reapply every few months, would just fall off. Now, granted, a lot of this is also the weathering. I mean, you can see where this is not a full thing anymore. But they're still around. I also like to mention in these images, whoever the hell is doing the landscaping out here is doing an amazing job, because they're in the middle of a freaking jungle. Never forget that. These things are in the jungle. A lot of these are discovered like recently, like in the last couple of decades. Some dude just going through the jungle trips over a rock and realizes, oh wait, there's a temple here. There's just a freaking temple out in the middle of the jungle. Because that's how the jungle is. Imagine, because we're here in South Carolina, imagine the kudzu that we've got where it grows over everything. That, but like 100 times worse and everywhere, all the time. Yeah. So this is the old Aztec stuff. Also, you may notice pyramid shape, and again, to push back on Ancient Aliens, guys, that's just human nature. The example I came up with last week was like, if you're a child and you're given blocks, usually the first shape you're going to build is a little like pyramid structure. It's just 3 and then 2 and then 1, because that's stable. And then you're going to build a tower because it's taller, and then it's going to fall over, and you usually like squish your fingers or something, and you're going to be like, oh, that sucks, I'm not going to do that again. Gold shiny pyramid structure easy. That's just how human brains work. Not to say this was easy to build, but it's a whole lot easier to build than a tower. Anyway, so here is the Aztecs and Mayas. This also shows the Toltecs, which the book doesn't get into, so we're not going to worry about it. But they were, I guess, here in the center where the Mayas, the Aztecs capital was. So I guess that was like the last real big fight. Don't worry about that. It's not in the book. It's not going to be in the test. But just to show how close the Mayas were to the Aztecs. Nearby, pretty large, but again, they broke up into these cities eventually. But close enough to trade. But not close enough to get conquered, I guess you'd say. And there is the Maya temples. Again, similar, but has its own flair. Like if it's easy to confuse the two, but if you know what you're looking for, it's like, okay, this is different than this. Also, this one's in much better shape. And no, I'm not going to be like my real weird art history professor and be like, okay, I'm going to bring up a picture and you have to tell me what it's from and what the year is. And like, come on, dude, you got to relax. He's interesting. All right, and there is the Inca Empire, more or less, which is to say, like, almost the entire western coast of South America. Um, they, uh, they had quite a bit going on. And there is, I guess that's Machu Picchu? Yes, it might be Cusco. But, yeah, so this is one of their real famous cities up on a mountain. Obviously, the roofs, which were probably thatched, had rotted away long ago. Um, but the city remains. They also have similar temples to the Aztecs and Mayas. But this was the image that I found, and that's what we're going with. Um, Also, this image doesn't show it. If you pan down just a bit, there is a really steep, really narrow staircase right here made out of stone for you to go down to see the city. Um, yeah, real safe. Uh, the children must have been like part mountain goat to survive this place. All right, let's get through a little bit more, and then we'll be where my Tuesday Thursday class is. So, so moving north, and to say that that's just like into like southwestern North America, the deserts. Mogollon potters, Hohokam irrigators had less advanced societies than the Aztecs and Mayas, which again, like compared to the greatest societies that were over here, saying they're less advanced isn't that much of an insult. I'd say they were doing pretty good. Further north than that, the Pueblo began constructing their masonry houses in the cliffs around 750 CE, which you should be familiar with if you've ever seen basically any kind of Western ever, like from a movie to a cartoon. These houses, these homes built into the cliffside are just really striking visually, so they're often used. Although the Pueblo people themselves are rarely seen because they were typically not very aggressive, so they didn't make for good antagonists, but they were typically around. They did move south, building freestanding buildings, but there was eventually a drought, and so they moved back to their cliff homes. Now, again, none of this is technically historical. This is all like archaeological and anthropological data. This is all based on like tools and ruins and like pottery shards and stuff that is technically beyond the purview of what we're doing with history. However, a lot of these groups are going to become important by the end of this chapter. So, they need to be talked about. Which is why when we talk about these tribes further north that were nomadic and hunted buffalo, we don't have any names here because there were a bunch of tribes, and since they were nomadic, they had no like settled civilization, and therefore we have very little of anything about them. Also, should mention, horses are not native to North America. They didn't show up until the Europeans did, which means that these tribes that hunted bison and larger things than bison for thousands of years did so on foot with a spear throwing device called the atlatl that like it basically, I've got a picture of it. I don't need no point in like miming it. Um, yeah, they would stalk through the grass and try to ambush a lone bison and hope that they spear it enough to not get murdered by it. Because if you're not familiar with what a bison looks like size wise, um, think of the largest cow or bull you've ever seen in your life and then double that. These things are huge. I was in Yellowstone back in, I guess I was technically still in grade school, middle school maybe, and I was standing beside a parked car at the end of the car, and a bison walked out from the other side of the car, and his head was here, and the back of his hump was here, and he just strolled along. I mean, their heads are like this. They're huge. Um, Now, the ones in Yellowstone know that people aren't going to mess with them, so they're pretty chill. But if you so much as look at them wrong, they will kill you. um, so the way these tribes would often take care of the bison is with the buffalo jump, where multiple tribes will come together and basically herd the bison towards a cliff and force as many of them over the cliff as possible, where the bison, of course, jump and fall to their deaths. And then the tribes will go down and butcher them and have a lot of meat and hide and whatnot all at once. Because, again, hunting these things was dangerous. And these guys are a lot smaller than the woolly rhinoceroses and mammoths and whatnot. So, yeah, mad stuff. Which, again, this is why these groups were sparse. You can't build a large, thriving civilization on barely surviving hunting stuff that's much larger than you. Meanwhile, the Chumash tribe, who went further down the Pacific coast, used hunting and gathering, as well as fishing. Now, again, well, I say again, I just mentioned this in my previous class. So, when I was teaching this or no, I didn't teach this, it doesn't matter. When I was teaching at Tri-County upstate, I had a class that was Technology in America, which was basically this class, but we focused on like the technology of the groups as time progressed. And again, it was really just this class, but it focused very slightly more on the technology. Like here, we would talk about like we talk more about the Adel, or the houses that they built. Earlier, with the groups that settled up in the north, they or actually we'll talk about that in just a second. The Chumash, like basically the ones that came across from Asia all had spears, and then as they made their way east into the plains, they became smaller with the Adel, so they could throw them farther. The ones that went south along the coastline basically created harpoons. They had hooks on the end of the spear, and they tied a rope to the end so they could throw it and then reel it back in. And it was essentially how like their tools evolved as they moved, and their food sources changed. And I bring that up because with the Chumash specifically, I had this picture that I cannot find again, but it was basically it's like a fish basket, which isn't that different from like fish traps we use today. It just wasn't metal, obviously, where it was like a basket, like it sounds like, where it's larger at the front, smaller in the back. but then in the front they had like pieces of reed that pointed inwards like spikes, so the fish can swim in, but then they get to the end and they realize, oh, well, we're stuck, so they try to go back out and they bump into those spikes and don't want to go through it because obviously that hurts. They can swim out if they're real careful, but fish are kind of dumb. And also be placed in the river, so they'd be having to fight the current and also trying to like wiggle through this small space. And it was just a really efficient way of catching fish. So efficient that the Chumash, compared to every other group we've talked about so far, including the Aztecs, Mayas, and Incas, are the only group that, based on anthropological data, which is to say like bones and just stuff that we found, not records, because again they didn't have written records. They're the only group that didn't have any kind of famine. If there was a drought and it killed all the stuff that they were growing, they still had fish. If there was some kind of plague that came through and it ran the animals out, they still had fish. Because unlike modern day, where you can overfish a region and like completely wipe out the fish population, putting a couple of fish traps in a river isn't really going to slow the fish population down that much. Because even the Chumash tribe is as successful as it wasn't that large, so they didn't have that much of an impact on the fish population. And fish is really, really good for you. It's very high in protein. It's a real good source of calories, which is important for like survival. You know, it's like, oh, you want the low calorie? It's like, no, you don't if you're surviving. Calories are important for just surviving. Yeah, so the Chumash did really well, is what I'm saying. And speaking of a group that did really well, we have, finally, the Hopewell. Now, I have to stress this because I was wrong when I said that when I put this down the first time, and mostly it's to be fair, the book isn't super clear about it, but it's also kind of my fault because I didn't really read into it. The Hopewell is not a tribe. The Hopewell is not a culture. The Hopewell is not a single group. The Hopewell is like a collective of a bunch of tribes that are connected via trade, and I wouldn't even say like military alliance even, but they have similar enough going on that they would build stuff together, and they had trade alliances, they had some level of religious alliances, and this cultural thing, as much as I can put it into words, existed from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, from Texas to Florida. It was the entire central region of North America. All centered around, if you can think of a map in your head, all centered around like the Mississippi River. But like basically anywhere the Mississippi or its tributaries touched, these people were there. And again, not the same group, but they were connected. And it's really, really cool. And some, and by some I mean like 2% of their stuff is still around. And that stuff is still pretty cool. And I'm going to show you that in the like 10 minutes of class we have left. I timed it pretty well. Okay, so, and there is there's a YouTuber I discovered, and this is the reason that I'm really harping on the Hopewell guys, because I learned a lot about them. That mostly he like debunks pseudo-archaeology crap, which is to say he and I would agree on ancient aliens bullshit. But he did like this whole huge thing on a Hopewell site in, I think it was Ohio, and was talking about how like we've lost most of the Hopewell sites because They're like, they're earthen mounds and earthworks. They're not stacks of rocks. They're, well, earth mounds. But if you see them from a distance, they're shapes. They're obviously things. But if you're coming in from the ground level and you're like, okay, we want to build a town here, you see hills and you're going to bulldoze them. And a lot of times those are burial mounds. But when the American government bulldozes a burial mound of Native Americans, throw them in a river, it's fine. Yeah, anyway, so real quick, Pueblo houses. Again, we've probably seen these before. This is another kind of one further back. They're just built right into the glyphs. Very safe, very stable. They probably moved to those freestanding houses because once you're in a single place and you're just like trying to eke out a living from the area around you, this probably isn't the best place for farming, but it's at least pretty defensible. And here's, your basic plains natives. Again, horses were not a thing until the Europeans showed up. So they hunted with this. The adaddle is, is this, which you put the spear or dart in, and then it was used. Basically, it was like it used like lever physics, where it more or less made your arm longer so that you could throw things harder. And believe me, that extra little bit of penetration is important if you want to kill a buffalo. Here we have a Chumash house. This is obviously a reconstruction, but this is how a lot of the Chumash houses would have been built. Do you know what these bones are? The Chumash were the ones on the coast. So what bones would they have access to that would be this large? No, the woolly rhinos are dead. No, they're on the coast by the ocean. Sharks don't have bones, they have cartilage. Mammoths are gone too. I mean, I kind of alluded to it when I said they had harpoons. What would you use a harpoon for? Whales. These are whale ribs. They use whale ribs for the structures of their homes here. Because again, you kill a whale, you're gonna feed the village for like a month. And that's where the Chumash largely lived, Southern California. Again, look at all these rivers. They were spoiled for choice. Again, the whale killing wasn't super necessary because, again, they just had to just hang out at the rivers. Okay, here is the Hopewell structures. Again, if you want to check out, and again, this applies to you online folks as well. If you want to check out more on the Hopewell people, Mini Minuteman did two. Milo, I don't remember his last name. His YouTube's Mini Minuteman. He did a video on this, the Newark Great Circle, as well as the Octagon right here, talking about like sacred geometry and not like the weird pseudoscience-y sacred geometry, but like how they actually um, align this with like constellations and stuff, um, this is pretty cool. So, yeah, and this stuff is like damn near in the middle of a city, and it's amazing that it survives at all. As far as what you can actually see, most of it looks like this, where it's little hill mounds. But again, when you zoom out, you can see that these were very intentional in their construction and huge. Like this one here, Milo and the guy that is like the tour guide there were walking around in it. He was walking past this part. You could barely see this end. Like it was huge. This thing is massive. So yeah, oh right, and also not just each individual one, but the interaction sphere, as they're calling it here, was massive. Like I said, from Canada to South America to the Gulf of Mexico, and from all the way over here in Texas to, well, I said Florida, but actually the Atlantic Ocean, and all the way up, all the way to this side of the Great Lakes to the other. And again, these people were not one tribe. They weren't connected in any way beyond like trade and cultural values, and really just sort of agreements. And a lot of them had their own spin on it, like these regional, I mean, that's why it says like regional cultures. They would sort of have their own spin, but it was distinctly Hopewell, which is really cool. Unfortunately, they weren't like a military alliance, or there might have been, some resistance when the Europeans showed up. I think this group also sort of had fallen apart before the Europeans arrived. So yeah, that's the Native Americans, from the Aztecs to the Hopewell. The next section is the Mediterranean, and as a Europeanist, I can't talk about the Mediterranean in less than 30 minutes, so that'll be it for us today. Yeah, any questions on anything? And just as a reminder, I will put this up on Blackboard once we finish the chapter, or we're like right near the end of the chapter. We're only about halfway through right now, so I'm not putting it up on Blackboard yet. But once we get towards the end, I will go ahead and throw it up on Blackboard in case you missed anything or need to look anything over. It'll be up there. Okay, that'll be it. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.